Hey everyone, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you, and today I am going to be taking a look at 3 new cases from Corsair, which your feed is probably full up with, and that is the 4000D, the 4000D Airflow, and then the 4000X at the end. And they are incredibly similar but also very different, and when we do test them they perform very differently as well. So I'm going to give you a good whiz round, but make sure you're comfy when we come to the performance testing, because I've got an awful lot to tell you and talk to you about. Now, I would normally start at the top and at the front, but the main difference with these cases is all at the front. So I'm going to start here and then we're going to move on to an individual case, because everything from the front back is pretty much the same, bar a few caveats which we'll cover now. So the 4000D and the 4000D Airflow are both $79.99 GBP, and then the X at the end is $129.99. Or is it? No, I apologise, it's $119.99 because it's roughly £40 more expensive. But you do get 3 RGB fans, but we'll get back to that in a minute. So with the D has a solid front panel. Behind this solid front panel in the middle is a single 1300 RPM fan that's 120 mil big, with another matching 1300 RPM fan in the back. So one in the middle at the front, one in the back. Same with the Airflow, the only difference being this front panel. You get a 1300 RPM fan in the middle at the front, and then another one in the back exhausting. Now these panels are all going to be available separately. So if you did buy the D and then later on you fancied getting the Airflow, you could quite literally buy an Airflow panel from Corsair. They've not confirmed the prices of them, but I doubt whether they'll be expensive because of the actual price of the case. And then when you're not an idiot like me trying to film this at 12 o'clock midnight, you'll be able to just swap it over. The same with the X. If you wanted to upgrade your Airflow because you're not that fussed about it and you just want to have, you've bought some nice fans or something, you would be able to just buy the front panel and do that. And then when we do move on to the X, obviously the X has the glass front. Normally we've just moved them all around. And behind the glass front you get 3 RGB fans that spin up to 1400 RPM, but you don't get any other fans in the case whatsoever. And this is something that I am going to cover with you in the main review. When we do show you around, there is a fan in the back, but I've put that in there myself, so that wouldn't come with this at stock. You only get the ones in the front. I have spoken to Corsair about this, and they say that once you're kind of like buying into the ecosystem with the IQ and the RGB and all that sort of stuff, they kind of assume that you might buy some extra fans to plop in the roof or in the back of the case, or you might have a Corsair AIO as well, which you could then put in the roof, which would balance things out. But again, we'll talk to this in greater depth when we do the talk about the performance, because there is an awful lot of that for us to get through. One of the things I will say at the front, the mesh is the same on all of them and it's removable, but it's not quite the same on all of them because it's actually got a little detail in the bottom corner. So on the 4000 you can see it says 4000D, and it's the same for the 4000D Airflow. They haven't added any extra in, but you can see that then when you get over to the 4000X they have actually changed it, and it's some really minor details like that that they've brought in throughout the rest of the case, which I'll pick out with you in a bit, and you'll see that there are some really nice touches, yellow touches, little Corsair logos, just little things that show that they've made a bit of effort. But that's enough for the front. So with the case on its nose, what I can show you down the bottom is a power switch. Then you get a USB 3, then you get a USB 3.2 Gen 2, so you've got a D type there. Then type C, sorry, then you get a combined headphone and microphone, and then you get a reset switch. Grey mesh across the top, and with that grey mesh you can see that there's a little yellow tab up here which I will show you There we go. So you can see it's like a little rubber tab, but it's got the Corsair logo on it. And it's little fine details like this that you'll see throughout the case. And it just shows they've made a bit of effort. It also gives us something to grab hold of the mesh with. Now, with the mesh, you can see that you have two offset fan mounts there, one for 120, one for 140. It's offset so that you can mount an AIO in the roof. If you were to put 140mm AIO in the roof, there will be just enough clearance to get over some low profile RAM. With the 120, you'll get a little bit more. But like I said, it is plenty off center there, so you've got plenty of clearance underneath. And I like the fact that that triangular mesh is actually used throughout the case. It's around the back, it's on the power supply cover, it's a nice little touch. And if you get the airflow as well, that's the same pattern mesh that you get on the very front panel, which again is nice, and it ties everything together. And I like the fact that it's kind of symmetrical as well, and better than just dots and stuff that's, you know, we have been used to of old. Underneath, very clean and simple. This is a hard drive mount, which I'll show you when we do get around the back. This is a cable that I have trapped when I've put the back panel on, but it actually does go to show you how good that this back panel design is, because it clips in a very different way. Normally they clip in on the very bottom of the case and you have to push them in and you can't have anything in the gap, but you quite clearly saw then that there was a cable poking out and it's still closed. And when I show you the door panel, you'll understand why. That's actually quite a cool thing. The only other thing is the power supply fan mount. If you put your fan face down, and you can see that you lift it a little bit and then it locks into place. So lift or push down as you would do if it was on the desk. Lift up and it exposes more triangular mesh. There are rubber feet on the bottom of everything, and it does kind of show you that the feet are grey, and you can also see that the feet on the front actually follow all the way around, and that's part of the design for the front panel. So the front panel is the same for all of the cases, and you just have the fans that are different and the actual front panel itself. I've already shown you that they pull off, and you can see that you get a good amount of clearance down the side, and it is the same for all of them. Squeaky tripod, but you can see that you get a decent amount of clearance there to be able to let the air through. Goes all the way down both sides of the front panel. Round the back, 120mm fan mount, which is elongated. You can move it down if you've got an AIO fitted, you can move it up if you haven't. You've got normal 7 slots down the back. Power supply, you'll see that there are 8 mounts, and that's because you can mount it either way and it doesn't matter which way you mount it. There are also 2 vertical GPU mounts. I haven't got a Corsair riser cable, so I haven't been able to test a graphics card, but in all reality you would need to test an awful lot of them. But what I can tell you is the glass panel sits right on the very outside, so if you've got a normal dual slot graphics card, you're going to get about 15 to 20mm of maximum clearance over there. I think with the bulk of graphics cards you're going to be okay. It's obviously not going to be the same amount of airflow as if you had your graphics card in the normal horizontal position, but we've kind of got used to that, and with most decent aftermarket, decent airflow graphics cards, it will be able to cope. Yes, your fans might spin a little bit more. Yes, it might be a few degrees warmer, but hell, we'll be able to see it in the side of the case. And it's good that the option is there. And there are also 2 mounts, which I'll show you when we do delve inside. So if you buy the Corsair cable, it actually does screw into the bottom of the case, and those little standoffs actually come in the box with the case as well. Side door. We can undo the screws, and then the door still stays on. But what I did want to show you, again with a squeaky tripod, I do need to oil it, is you can see that there are little rubber grommets on the threads. Might only be a small thing, but it does mean that when it's done up, it's not going to rattle. It does up nice and tight, acts a bit like a spring washer, so it stops them from coming loose. It's just a nice small detail. Many people might not even notice. I thought it was kind of nice. When we do take the door off though, so what we do is actually pull straight off. And that was why, with the cable sticking out down below earlier on, when I put the door on, there are 4 tabs at the front, and I can show you the 4 tabs on the door. So what you do is you locate the 4 tabs on the door, and then there are 2 little push pop pins here. So that's how it locates in. 4 at the front and then 2 pop pins at the back that you literally just push into place. And then when you want to pull it off, you give it a bit of a tug, and there you go. Do it again, pop pins at the front, in the back, and you can see that I've left the cable poking out down the side. Now the cable poking out down the side, yes, it looks ugly, but if you've ever had one of those cases where you had the sliding mechanism on the bottom, you'd have the case on its side, you'd be pushing all your cables in, you have to slide it on. They've actually just made it loads easier with this, because if you get the cables roughly where you want them, they can kind of stick out and bulge, and it doesn't really matter. And you literally just get the side panel on, push it into place, and then do your screw up. It's kind of like really simple, but it really works, and it's kind of annoying. Anyway, round the back, 2.5 inch hard drive mounts. You can mount these on the power supply cover, which I'll show you in a minute. You do get a 2 3.5 inch hard drive mounts here. This cage is actually completely removable as well, so that if you want to, you can have a much longer power supply or water cooling, which again I'll show you in a minute. On the 4000X, you do get this extra add-on, and it's basically a light commander, and it's the basic one. So you've got 3 fans in the front and there's 3 slots there, but it gives you an extra 3 slots. So if you wanted to add 2 in the roof and 1 in the back, you've actually got the ability there to plug those in, and it will then, it's got a USB on it as well, and it links into your motherboard, and then it all hooks up with iCUE. So if you wanted to, you could literally just have 6 fans in here in total, but obviously once you start adding in possibilities of like AIOs and all that sort of stuff, it does get a little bit more complicated, but it's the start of the iCUE ecosystem, and you can expand from it. The fact that you can smack 3 fans in with it is actually pretty cool. So not only do you get the 3 RGB fans in the front, you get the ability to expand your RGB ability as well. Do be very clear though, or I do need to be very clear, that this does not come with the 4000 Airflow or the 4000D. Deep breaths, Tom. Plenty of cable routing around here, and they do come with Corsair Velcro cables as well. I have done an awful lot of testing with this, and I'm videoing this very, very late. I've spent so long taking fans in and out, which I'll show you in a moment, which is why it looks like a bomb site, but it does also show that it's actually really easy to build in. You've got your CPU EPS 8 pin that you can put up here. This one here would be a really good place to put some of your AIO cables through, or the USB cable from your AIO, for example. More room over here, and then even more room at the front. So there's plenty of cable routing. There's a big cutout down here, which is being covered up with a cover on the other side, which again, I'll show you in a minute. So there's plenty of room for cables. The door makes things really easy, and there's plenty of cable routing mounts at the top. They've done a pretty damn good job of the back. Round to the business side of the case, the door comes off in exactly the same way. There's tabs on the front, there's 2 pop pins on the back, and it's a nice clear door. I haven't pulled the plastic off of it in case you think it's scratched, but it is tempered glass, and I actually like the fact that they bothered to put a white ribbon around the outside, or a white rim around the outside. A white frame would be a better word to use, Tom. And it's all white, and they've not tinted it, so it's clear. So I like that. When we look on the inside at the back, you can see some grey covers. I always call them PCI Express covers, but a lot of people call them expansion port covers. But anyway, you can see with a squeaky tripod, grey covers. And I like the fact that they've kind of followed that grey theme on from the front through into the back. And just because I've just had this conversation with Corsair directly, I think that Aaron and Pascal will now laugh. It's a shame that the frames on the fans aren't grey or white. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Power supply cover. Now, one thing I will say is you're going to have to look pretty carefully, but you can see there that it says 4000X, and it does say 4000D on the other ones as well. That's another one of those small little details I said to you about. And then also over there you can see the Corsair with the yellow. Another really small but nice detail. And see, it's just, I know it's small things, but it's made me smile. Anyway, that mount there and that mount there are the screw holes for your vertical riser card. And if you buy a Corsair card, it comes with little screw mounts on it, and these little mounts actually come with the case, which is a really nice touch. You can see that we've got some massive cable routing holes at the back there near the motherboard, but that's also because the 2.5-inch hard drive mounts from the other side can clip in here, screw in there, and you can have them on display if you want to. So you've got loads of those options down at the bottom. Now, one thing I will say is this bit here. You can have a H150i, a H115i, or a H100i mounted in the front if you want. And I happen to know that there are little mounts around here to put a cover over if you don't, or if you have got a H115 or a H100 and you want to cover this up so that it looks nice, then there is a cover, but it's not in the box. Now, you can only really use it on the D and the D airflow because you've got the extra fan in the front of the X. But I do think it should have been in the box for those people. Also, with the X, one of the things I will say is this fan here, and I'm going to say this and we're going to cover it in the testing, but this fan here is pretty much here just for the looks in the front. So if you wanted to, what you could do is just pop that one out, put it in the back, and then you should be able to put your cover in, but you can't, and then you'd have 3 RGB fans in sight. But the thought of those 3 RGB fans I do need to talk to you about in great detail, because it actually kind of ruins your airflow. And it's a very weird one, but I will talk to you about how adding fans to this case actually makes it perform worse, which is very, very weird. But anyway, so this is our cable cover that sits in the front, and I think they've done a really nice job of it. And I actually prefer these now to grommets, which is quite a big thing, because there's a lot more area for you to be able to move it up and down, and you haven't got to worry about the grommet stuff sticking out, and it can actually make things look tidier and nicer. And I'll be completely honest with you, I've been toying with the idea of putting lights on the other side of those so it lights through. There's loads of things that you can do, but it's actually a really nice touch. So, one of the things I do need to be very clear about with you here right now is this fan does not come in the 4000X. I've added this and I will explain why in the testing. With the 4000D and the 4000D airflow, you only get one fan in the front, and it is just a black version, not RGB, and basically looks like that because this one I actually took out of the 4000D to put in there. So keep that in mind. You get the idea. It's really late. I need to talk to you about performance now. Okay, so performance is a very mixed bag, and I do have some points to cover for you. So the 4000X is only going to be featured in our max RPM graph. And also, it's only featured in the max RPM graph with an extra fan that I've added from one of the other cases because it performed so terribly bad on its own. But also, if you buy a case like this, you probably are going to end up putting an extra fan in the back and maybe some in the roof anyway. Corsair actually did say to me they expect people to be putting an AIO in the roof, possibly, maybe not one in the back, or buying an extra fan for the back and maybe an extra one in the roof. They see it as kind of like a starting package, and they give you ones in the front, and then the extra RGB slots in the back are for people that are going to expand in it. So I get that, which is why I added it. But one of the things I do need to say is that even though I did add it, it's kind of terrible. So the weird thing with it is, if we go to max RPM graph and you can see that the airflow and the D around the bottom actually do fairly well. Now the 4000X with the rear fan fitted as well, this graph is sorted by CPU performance, by the way, actually did really well. But what I do is I sort them as CPU performance, and then I also sort them in GPU performance. Now, when I do CPU performance, I run OCCT for half an hour in the 2012 mode to see what our maximum would be, and it's a very CPU intensive task. Then afterwards I would run Unigine Valley in 4K 8x AA, sorry I apologise, I would run it in 1080p 8x AA. But what I would do is when I first get up in the morning, what I would do is I'd put it on, I'd give it half an hour to warm up. And then what I would do is I'd start with my maximum case RPM tests, and then I would move on to the lower ones, and then I would move on to the lower ones still. So effectively what we do is we start with the maximum cooling potential, and then we slowly turn it down. Rather than doing it the other way round, because if we do it the other way round, you start with the fans not doing anything and warm all the hardware up, and then when you turn the fans up, you're hoping that the fans will be able to cool it down. So we do a test. So let's say maximum fan RPM, what I would do is I would do the CPU test, then I'd leave it half an hour. Then I'll do the GPU test, then I'll leave it half an hour. And they're half an hour tests as well. And then we turn the fans down, CPU, leave it half an hour, GPU, you get the idea. There's lots of gaps in to try and level out the temperatures. But what we also do is we take the temperatures and then we take the ambient temperature of the room at the end of the test away from it to give us our delta temperatures, and it's the delta temperatures I'm showing you in the graphs. Deep breaths. I did really well considering the time. So CPU seemed to do all right. GPU, you can see that the results go worse, and then weirdly the results for the actual 1400 RPM, which is this config, this case, the X, the GPU really didn't do very well at all. To the point where we were quite confused because there's 3 fans in the front and you just assume that it would cool it better. And when I say we, it's because I've done a lot of testing to the point where I actually had to go and talk to the product manager at Corsair and kind of say to him, oh, I don't think this one is performing that great. And we had lots of conversations. But the problem was this wasn't the only thing that we were talking about. And then when we moved on to the 1000 RPM, basically, don't forget the 4000D and the 4000D airflow only had that one single fan in the front. So these are our results, and you can see that the airflow did really well, and the D come in a little bit behind. And then when you move on to the graphics card, it actually then you can see that it still did all right. It's very much in the thick of the pack, and it's not being embarrassed by anything, but the GPU was definitely a bit warmer. But then what I did is I basically ruined it, because I then added a second fan in the front, in the top, from the other case. So that we had 2 of the black fans in the front. Obviously we're talking about the 4000D and the 4000D airflow, and then the normal one in the back. And that's when things for the CPU got better, as you can see with the results here. The extra front fan made a great difference on the CPU temps. But with the GPU temps, it got worse, like considerably worse, and you can see they both kind of went up the graphs quite a bit, which perplexed me even more. But then when you think about it, if you have a single fan in the front, it's going to be blowing straight over the graphics card and then eventually coming up and over this, which is your rear exhaust. But if you introduce a second fan in the front, you've got 2 lots of air coming through. So it's making me think that this one goes straight through the CPU fan, straight out the back. But because of the extra airflow going through, I think a lot of the air gets pulled up from that front fan, and it's just not doing the graphics card any favours. And it's the only logical thing that I can think of that would be ruining the graphics card temperatures so abruptly. It has to be causing some weird kind of vortex issue in the front. And that would be the only thing that would explain why, with the same fan RPMs, that the single fan actually cooled the graphics card better. And that would also explain why, If you end up increasing the airflow considerably, so you're pretty much getting 2 lots of fan airflow going through the CPU, that also explains why the CPU temps were better, but the graphics card temps were worse. You're pretty much causing a dead area underneath here, and it's just not getting enough air to be able to keep it cool. So that was that. So the long story short is the 3 fans in the front are pretty much there for looks because they don't do much other than that. If you buy the D or the airflow, then the single fan in the front is better for graphics cards. 2 fans in the front is better for CPU. So you almost have to pick and choose. I would personally probably go with the horrible looking, if you're looking for performance, then I would genuinely go with the single fan and just kind of live with it in reality. I might even go up to 140mm fan so that you can shift a bit more air, through. Take up a little bit more room in the front so you can space it out that little bit better, and probably still get some decent temps. Then when we move on to 600 RPM, this point I have to admit, with all of the cases in this graph, I am being harsh because I fix all of the case fans to 600 RPM, and then I haven't said already, the CPU fan is actually locked on a 9-volt adjuster, so that RPM stays static, and the graphics card is locked at 60% as well, so it's only the case that can make any difference. But with the case fans on 600 RPM, you're pretty much torturing the hardware inside it because they're being stressed to within an inch of their lives and pretty much having to cool with whatever dribs gets passed through from the front of the case. Now, the airflow did all right, and so did the D. They were very, very close. They were closer than I thought they were going to be in the CPU. But again, what you need to remember is there's really not a lot of air being passed over it. And I think the only reason why that the GPU did okay in these graphs is there's not a lot of gap between the GPU and the front of the case. CPU, it was a little bit different. Sorry, GPU, it was different. So this CPU was what I was on about before. That didn't do that great. With the airflow, the GPU definitely got more air there, and it actually did really well at 600 RPM, quite surprising. Surprising enough for me to run that test 3 times. And the 4000D sat where you'd kind of expect it. The extra vents in the front of the airflow at low RPMs does make a difference. So if you're trying to build a really quiet rig, really quiet, it's going to mean really low RPMs, then the airflow case will be the one for you. Right, so an awful lot of testing went into this, like days and days and days of it, a lot more than I was hoping for, considering I'm trying to test 3080Xs. Multiple, yes, lots of work going on. Anyway, no need for sympathy, children. My thoughts on this. In reality, the 4000X is all about the looks with the front of that case, but I would say that you kind of need to then be packing out the rest of the case with extra airflow to really make it worth bothering with. It's kind of, and one of the things I didn't kind of say to you is compared to the the airflow with a single fan, this case, graphics card wise, is 10 degrees hotter, thereabouts, than the other one. I think once you took the delta into account, I think it was about 6 degrees. But this one is definitely not the best performing. Just because it's got more fans doesn't mean it works better. You'd think with more fans and a higher RPM available, it would, but it didn't. It was all right for CPU, graphics card, definitely not. And that was kind of something that followed through with the other ones as well, with the multiple fans. So if you're going to put more than one fan in the front, then you're going to favour your CPU. It's not going to do you any favours with your GPU. It does make me wonder though, if you were to have fans in the top, whether it would make any difference. I genuinely didn't have more hours to be able to test it. As I said, this NDA goes live on the 15th at 2 p.m. It's now the 15th at midnight, midnight, so I'm already into the 15th. I've not edited, I've not done anything, and I've still got to upload the video, and my internet is running like a bag of doggy doo at the moment, so things are down to the wire. It's probably a good job the 3080 got moved, because otherwise I would have been stuffed. So in reality, I would say that this one is really about looks, and you have to forego performance because the extra fans, for whatever reason in this case, do trip it up. And it's now making me realise that I actually need to do a lot more testing on a lot of other cases, because when I set out to put, with the 4000D and the 4000D airflow, when I set out to put that extra fan in the front, I actually thought I'd be doing what many of you would do at home, and I thought I would make performance better. I was not prepared to make the graphics card temperatures worse, but it's definitely something that has now been buried into the old grey matter, and it is going to make me think twice, or rather do more testing with a lot of the other cases when they come out. So weirdly, less is more with this case on every level. So if you made me choose between all of the cases, then I'd probably buy the airflow, because it's going to perform better at low RPMs, it's going to give you better airflow, and it does in reality give you some better options. You do just need to realise that if you want more airflow, then adding loads more fans is not going to do you any justice, and I cannot for the life of me work out why. But do please remember, before you start typing underneath that I don't know what I'm talking about, I have been in contact with Corsair about this today, and they were actually impressed with the amount of extra work that I'd gone into to try and work out why stuff had been janky, and they appreciated the fact that I was actually trying to make it perform better when I added the extra fan in to add more data to the suite. So it's a complicated one, and I'm sorry about that, but in reality, it is what it is. I personally think it just needs more fans in the roof. But if I'd started adding more fans in the roof as well, like I said, I would have added in like 6 hours worth of testing. So I've got 3 cases to test, 3 fan RPMs to test. It just ends up being a never ending. I could have spent a week just testing these cases for Corsair. And in reality, I only really wanted to spend a day on it, and it went into 3 days. So yes, lots and lots of testing. So in reality, I know the title at the beginning said Tiny Tom Logan likes the D, but obviously it was the Corsair 4000D, so that was the funny side of it. But the one out of the 3 that I would personally have would be the airflow. You still get the dust filter, you can still see the lights through the front, and it does give you good performance. Also, critically, it does at low RPMs, if you want to go down that route, give you a good amount of airflow over the D. Why would you pick the plain front D? I don't know. Maybe you could put some graphics up the front of it or something like that. The same with this. You could put some like vinyl. You can actually buy vinyl that looks like etching. It's like frosted vinyl. So you've got lots of options with this to turn this into a picture frame. With the D, it's just a very blank canvas. You could have numerous things there. I think if it was me with the D, I'd probably end up pulling the front off and putting LED strips behind it so that it would light out from beneath the case. So there's some few modding options for you, some things that you can think about that you could possibly purchase when you start doing your build with the case. But for the love of God, don't add too many fans into it, expecting your graphics card temps to stay better. If you are going to be a gamer, graphics card focused, leave the front fan, or if you want to be clever about it, put a decent, I don't know, like a Noctua or maybe an ML140 from Corsair, 140mm fan in the front, play around with the RPMs, get a really good fan curve going on, and I think for graphics card only stuff you will be very surprised. Don't forget, with the bulk of games out there, that the graphics card will get tortured and the CPU doesn't particularly get smashed at all. And that is also why I test my graphics cards and my CPU coolers separately, because normally if you're doing a render, you're going to be battering this and putting a little bit of stress on that. Or if you're playing a game, you're going to be battering this and putting a little bit of stress on that. There's no point running a graphics card intensive test and a CPU intensive test, because that isn't real world, and that's the reason why I test like I do, because that's how you would use them at home. Anyway, that is me out. The cat is wandering around at my feet. It's incredibly late. I need to get this rendered, and I'd also like to go to bed fairly soon. So I'm going to crack on. I hope you enjoyed this. A lot of time, stress and effort went into doing all of these, and in reality these graphs don't even get close to the amount of time that I've had to spend testing. Deep breath, rub your earlobes, woosah. Thank you very much for tuning in. For all the regulars that made it to the end, I'd like to know how many cups of tea you had to have, how many biscuits you've eaten, but most importantly, you get yourself an internet cookie and you can post in the comments. If you like the in-depth nature of my videos, then please like, subscribe, comment, hit the bell, all that stuff, and I will be very, very grateful. But for now at least, this is the waffling Logan giving you too much data and taking too much of your time up for a case out. Ding! Love you, sis.